One person is dead and dozens injured as Typhoon Krathon bears down on Taiwan. Extreme rain and landslide warnings are in place. The economy, abortion, and immigration are the top talking points in a notably civil U.S. vice presidential debate. Israel vows payback after Iran launches a barrage of over 180 ballistic missiles. Plus, enough is enough. One-time presidential hopeful Ko Wen-je refuses to be questioned for a fifth time in a corruption probe. Good evening. I'm Eric Gao, and this is TaiwanPlus News. We begin with the latest on Typhoon Krathon, whose strong winds and rains have already left one person dead and dozens more injured. Two others are missing after falling into storm waters. A so-called Typhoon Day has been declared nationwide, meaning all schools, offices, and businesses have closed their doors. Now, Krathon has been slowly making its way around Taiwan's southwestern coast and is expected to swing northeast across the island. Forecasters predict it will make landfall on Thursday afternoon, that's later than earlier predictions, before hovering over the country for a few days. Extreme rain warnings are in place in 15 cities and counties, especially along the south and east coasts. 22 roads and bridges are closed, and landslide warnings are in place throughout the mountainous Hualien and Taitung counties. All domestic flights have been canceled, leaving hundreds of passengers stranded on outlying islands. Meanwhile, the crew from a Barbados-registered ship that flooded in the storm's outer rim has been rescued, but an investigation is ongoing into oil that may have spilled from that ship. And while the typhoon is expected to weaken as it crosses Taiwan, officials are still warning of the potential for deadly floods and landslides. Our reporter Rick Loud is live for us in the southern city of Tainan. That's where the storm is expected to make landfall. Rick, what's the situation where you're at?
Well, we're really beginning to get a taste of what Typhoon Krathon is going to bring. Wind and rain noticeably increasing over the last 2 hours. As we've driven through town just now, we've seen trees down, we've seen the rivers full of water. And just before we came on air, a government warning was sent to everyone's phones, telling people to stay away from coastal areas because they're simply too dangerous. Concerns here that the low pressure at the center of the storm could bring a storm surge and therefore widespread flooding. We spent some time in Anping district, a port district of Tainan, looking at a community facing up to this big storm. 82-year-old shopkeeper Hu Yusha is determined to stay here in the home she's lived in for more than 60 years, despite a storm warning and local officials' advice for her to move to safer ground. Hu lives alone, just meters from the waterfront in Taiwan's southern port city of Tainan. The full force of Typhoon Krathon is set to hit here in just a few hours, following a rare trajectory coming in from the west around Taiwan's southern tip to strike large urban centres like Tainan. Close to 70,000 people live in this ancient port district of Anping. Many of their houses are close to harbours and rivers and therefore liable to flooding. The local government has been keeping residents updated on the typhoon's progress, and there's even an app for them to check rising water levels. Residents have been advised to stock 3 days of food and supplies, and should they need to flee their homes, 16 evacuation centres have been set up to accommodate them. More than a dozen pumps across this district are moving water out of drains in an attempt to keep streets clear.
所以说目前来讲的话，应该是我们安平这边民众应该是还好，但还是会有一些焦虑的，只是应该是会平常心看待的。
Taiwan is prone to both earthquakes and typhoons. Communities here regularly practice how to respond to disasters, but its trajectory makes this typhoon different from others, and could bring a rare storm surge to cities in the country's southwest.
Most typhoons which are impacting Kaohsiung, Tainan, they've already gone across the central mountain range and are severely weakened, and it's going to be coming right off the ocean and impacting these areas. So it's going to be you know, in very good condition. The typhoon is still going to have its very strong circulation. So my hunch is that these areas are going to experience like typhoon conditions which are very atypical to what they usually experience as the typhoons come in from the east.
It's just over 2 months since Taiwan's last typhoon, a storm that left 13 people dead and hundreds injured across the country. Many people here saying they learned lessons from that battering that they are now putting into practice. But Typhoon Krathon has already proven both atypical and unpredictable, sure to test even well-prepared communities like this port of Amping. Typhoon Krathon is still about 100 kilometers off the coast here. It has weakened in intensity, it's no longer considered a super typhoon, but it's also picked up speed. It's now moving at about 9 kilometers an hour in this direction, expected to make landfall not far from here tomorrow morning. The streets here in downtown Tainan now emptying, people heading home, making last-minute preparations, hunkering down as they wait for a long night, waiting for this big storm.
Thank you, Rick. That was our reporter Rick Lauert following the progress of Typhoon Krathon in Tainan. Now, the storm's unusual path towards Taiwan has taken meteorologists by surprise. Our reporter Reese Ayers spoke to forecasters to find out about where Krathon is headed and what makes this storm so unique.
Typhoon Krathon is proving to be quite the interesting storm. It was expected to make landfall on the southern city of Kaohsiung on Wednesday morning, but as we can see, as of Wednesday evening, it's still hovering off the southwest coast of Taiwan, and that's because this storm has been moving incredibly slowly, sometimes as slow as 7 kilometers per hour. Now, the storm is expected to make landfall either late on Wednesday or early Thursday morning in Taiwan's south. It's then going to move up Taiwan's west coast through cities like Tainan and Taichung, eventually reaching Taiwan's north by late on Friday. Now, this typhoon was downgraded from a super typhoon to a regular typhoon, but meteorologists are still warning that the slow pace of this storm could mean that rainfall hovers over areas of the country for longer than usual, increasing the risk of severe floods. Now, this storm is particularly interesting for several reasons. One of those is the direction at which it's approaching and striking Taiwan. It's coming in from the Pacific through the Bashi Strait and whipping around to strike Taiwan in the south, whereas most typhoons usually come in and strike Taiwan directly on the east coast. Now, another reason that this is particularly interesting is the slow pace at which it's moving, and that's because the storm is being pulled both southwards and northwards at the same time, with that northern pull being slightly stronger and pulling it up towards Taiwan's southwest coast. Another reason this storm is interesting is that it's expected to actually dissipate over Taiwan instead of moving on towards China, Korea, or Japan, as is typical. Now, this storm is expected to bring a lot of wind and a lot of rain, and given how unusual and unpredictable this storm is, people are being warned to take every precaution that they can to stay safe.
In the U.S., vice presidential candidates Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, they have taken the stage for their first and only scheduled debate. With just over a month to go until the election, the two sparred over the Middle East, immigration, and the state of U.S. democracy. Joyce Tseng reports.
A cordial start to a high-stakes debate. The U.S. vice presidential candidates had a policy-heavy exchange as they approached the final stretch in the tight race for the White House. The televised debate was hosted by CBS News in New York, a Democratic stronghold and former home of Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. His running mate, Senator J.D. Vance from Ohio on the left, and on the right, Democratic vice presidential candidate Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. They began by tackling the Middle East, where Israel and Iran have fired missiles in an escalating crisis. Walz saying steady U.S. leadership, as exhibited by his running mate Vice President Kamala Harris, is what's needed now more than ever, not the volatility of the former president.
It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. When our allies see Donald Trump turned towards Vladimir Putin, turned towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed.
Vance rebutted by pointing to Trump's, quote, effective deterrence from his time in office, also stating that a second Trump presidency would support Israel however it decides to defend itself.
Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. And look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys.
The candidates this evening appearing more courteous than their running mates at the jab-heavy presidential debate 3 weeks ago. At times, they were even showing sympathy for the other amid debating hot-button issues like gun violence.
First of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that you're doing okay. So. Christ have mercy.
Despite the decorum, the differences in the candidates' perspectives were evident. On the economy, Vance blamed economists for weakening American trade against its competitors.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that.
The senator also blaming the high cost of living on President Joe Biden's policies, which he pointedly called the Harris administration, painting the vice president as the primary decision maker. Meanwhile, his rival Walz, who has spent time in China teaching there in '89 and later starting a program to bring American students over, said Trump would have benefited from such a trip.
Being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID, and I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing.
The Minnesota governor, though, who once claimed he'd been to China dozens of times, with his campaign later revising that it was closer to 15, was pressed about competing claims on whether he was in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square uprising in Beijing in June of '89. Walz saying he misspoke.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said.
All in all, a quick-moving debate on multiple domestic and foreign issues, with largely polite disagreements between the Midwestern candidates. Though VP debates generally don't make or break the election, in as tight of a race as this one, the slightest shift in public opinion could be decisive. James Lin and Joyce Sin for TaiwanPlus.
Now, for more on the U.S. vice presidential debate, Louise Watt spoke to Jared Monshine, the Director of Research at the United States Studies Center at the University of Sydney.
How did both candidates fare in the debate?
J.D. Vance, I think, went out of his way to be a calmer and less combative Republican debater than Donald Trump has been in the last two debates, particularly the last debate with Kamala Harris. So I think both candidates stayed on message. Both candidates did not veer too far away from what they've said previously. But on the whole, the fact that J.D. Vance was able to stay disciplined and stay on message and not get as aggressive as Donald Trump has gotten, perhaps plays to his favor moving forward.
This debate seems quite civil in comparison to the Harris-Trump debate. Is there a chance that this might set a new tone for the election going forward?
I think there have been a number of instances where people have thought that an event or some sort of incident may cause the campaign to change tone. We've seen 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump, and in a number of instances, including those assassination attempts, people have asked that very question, whether this will somehow set a new tone of civility. I don't think it will. I think Donald Trump, in many ways, is who he is and has seen no benefit of being more civil. In many ways, he views it as sort of diluting his electoral attractiveness to the many people who voted for him.
Generally speaking, in US elections, vice presidential picks aren't seen as being that important. Is it any different this time around?
I think it is different, especially on the Republican ticket. Let's not forget that if Republican nominee Donald Trump wins, that would be his second term of office, and he is constitutionally limited from running again. So if Donald Trump does win, then we basically need to see who the Republicans would put up in 2028, and this could be one of the first and most well-known instances of a leading candidate in 2028 being J.D. Vance. What I took away from this debate is gaining some insights as to where J.D. Vance in particular is situating himself ahead of the 2028 election.
That was Jared Monshine from the United States Study Center at the University of Sydney. Israel is vowing to hit back after Iran sent a barrage of missiles into the country on Tuesday. Tehran targeted the country with nearly 200 ballistic missiles, but according to Israel, they caused little damage. Many of them were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defense system and by U.S. warships. Rosie Graninger reports.
Alarms sound in Israel as a barrage of rockets shoot through the sky. An unprecedented attack on the country by Iran. 180 ballistic missiles were launched. Iran saying it was in retaliation for the assassination of senior Hamas, Hezbollah and Revolutionary Guard leaders, including Ismail Haniyeh and Hassan Nasrallah. The extent of damage caused is unknown. Iran's Revolutionary Guard says 90% of its missiles successfully hit targets, while Israel claims there was minimal damage in the central and southern parts of the country, injuring 2 people. One Palestinian man in the occupied West Bank was killed by falling shrapnel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed retaliation.
איראן עשתה הערב טעות גדולה, והיא תשלם על כך. המשטר באיראן לא מבין את נחישותנו להגן על עצמנו ואת נחישותנו לגמול לאויבינו.
It marks the second time in Israel's history that Iran has launched a direct attack on it, the first being in April this year, amid soaring conflict and tension between Israel and Iran's close allies Hamas and Hezbollah. The strikes came as Israeli soldiers continue to conduct what they're calling a limited incursion into southern Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah members. The international community has been swift to denounce Iran's actions.
But I utterly condemn this attempt by the Iranian regime to harm innocent Israelis.
US President Joe Biden reaffirmed Washington's support of Israel, with the White House confirming it assisted Israel in shooting down the majority of the rockets.
Israel, with direct assistance from the United States and its partners, was able to successfully defeat this attack. This was a brazen, unacceptable attack by Iran.
Despite the US claiming it was a failure, Iran says they now consider the issue closed, indicating they aren't planning further attacks, but are prepared to strike again if Israel launches a retaliation.
اگر رژیم صهیونیستی که به دیوانگی رسیده کنترل نشه توسط امریکا و اروپا و بخواد چنین جنایت‌هایی رو ادامه بده و یا علیه حاکمیت و تمامیت ارضی ما وارد عمل بشه، عملیات امشب با چند برابر بزرگی تکرار خواهد شد و تمام زیرساخت‌های اونها مورد اصابت قرار خواهد گرفت.
But with Israel promising this attack won't go unpunished, it leaves the people caught up in the conflict in fear as the Middle East region edges closer to a full-scale war. Dolphine Chen and Rosie Graninger for TaiwanPlus.
6 people are dead and at least 9 others injured after a shooting and knife attack in the Israeli city of Tel Aviv. Police say the killing spree happened on Tuesday night inside a light rail carriage in Tel Aviv's Jaffa area before spreading onto the platform. The 2 attackers were shot and killed by civilians. Investigators suspect terror as the motive in the attack. China and Russia's Coast Guard have conducted a joint patrol in the Arctic Sea for the first time in history. China says ships from the 2 forces entered the region together on Tuesday, China's 75th National Day. The two countries have been conducting drills in the nearby North Pacific since September 21st. China has become increasingly active in the Arctic in recent years after launching a new Arctic policy in 2018. Tens of thousands of dock workers have gone on strike in the United States. This action puts nearly half of the country's ocean shipping on hold and could cost its economy billions of dollars each day. Cadence Quaranta reports.
Dock workers on strike. At major ports across the east and Gulf coasts of the United States, tens of thousands of workers have walked out. It's the first large dockers' union strike in nearly 50 years. The action comes after port operators and a union that represents about 45,000 dock workers failed to reach an agreement on a new contract by a Monday night deadline. The two sides disagree on pay increases and automation.
We're striking because these companies are making a lot of money. We have not been given fair raises in the past. We work in hard conditions. You know, we're out there in the rain, we're out there in the heat. 7 days a week, we're here on call.
The International Longshoremen's Association, or ILA, initially demanded a 77% pay raise for its members, but has since lowered that to just over 61%. It also wants a complete ban on automation, which dock workers fear will see their jobs replaced by robots.
Who owns the docks? Who owns the docks?
The port employers, represented by the U.S. Maritime Alliance, have offered smaller raises and also didn't agree to an automation ban.
Automation doesn't feed families. Automation doesn't pay taxes. These are the things our members make their livelihood off there. So we need to make sure we're protected in our job.
The strike is affecting ports all down the Atlantic coast, from Maine in the north to Texas in the south, and has put around half of the nation's ocean shipping on hold. Analysts say the strike could cost the U.S. economy billions of dollars per day, and if it continues for more than a few weeks, it could become an economic crisis, and all with the U.S. presidential election just weeks away.
So the longer the strike lasts, the two risks come out of it. One of them is political, because there will be an increasing impact on inflation, as well as on employment. The other part is that if we start running low of inventories of critical goods, especially related to medicine, then we have a national security issue.
Dock workers say they aren't trying to force a national crisis.
Nobody wants a prolonged strike. Nobody wants to have problems, but you have to fight for what you have to fight for.
Recent wage offers exchanged by the two sides suggest they are moving closer to a deal. But until an agreement is reached, an economic crisis looms. A major unwanted headache for the Biden administration in the final weeks before the election. Klein Wong and Cadence Quaranta for TaiwanPlus.
Claudia Sheinbaum has been sworn in as the first female president of Mexico. Lawmakers are shouting Presidenta, the feminine form of the word, for the first time in the country's history. Sheinbaum received the presidential sash, marking the start of her 6-year term. She inherits a number of problems from her predecessor, including high levels of violence, a sluggish economy, and rising debt. She says she is committed to advancing women's rights and to ensuring that Mexico remains a secure destination for foreign investment. Former Taipei Mayor Ko Wen-je has said no to a 5th round of questioning over alleged corruption. As John Vance reports, this won't be the end of a scandal shaking up national politics.
Former Taipei Mayor Ko Wen-je's lawyer remains tight-lipped at the prosecutor's office. His client has been in custody for weeks amid allegations of corruption. Prosecutors think developers of a shopping mall in Taipei bribed officials to expand its floor space when Ko was mayor. But how much Ko knew of the deal isn't clear. Their findings will have a national impact, as Ko is the head of one of Taiwan's big 3 political parties. Ko's supporters say 4 rounds of questioning have left him worn out. He's refused a 5th round that was supposed to happen on Tuesday. Due to health concerns, prosecutors aren't forcing the issue.
有没有可能北检一直不断的在重复问类似的问题，或者是不断在问一些兜来兜去，今天跟你扯北市科，明天跟你扯金华城，一直不断去解释这些问题，你会觉得心理上面的那个压力当然会很大。
As police hold other suspects in the case, a government working group is taking its own look at the scandal.
我们也会重新再把这一个相关的调查报告送交监察院去调查，或者是弹劾决策首长的行政责任。
Ko's silence won't stop prosecutors from digging. His fall could leave his Taiwan People's Party badly shaken and perhaps even upset the political balance of power, meaning this is just an intermission in a scandal that will continue to be in the national spotlight. Ryan Wu, Hank Xu, and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Police are investigating at least 15 cases of scalpers reselling tickets to this year's National Day celebration concert. 5,000 free tickets to the annual event were scooped up within 15 minutes of their release on Monday. Many of those were later listed online for high prices that same day. Authorities here in Taiwan are warning consumers to be vigilant. They've also formed a police task force to help take down the scalpers. Thanks for joining this evening for TaiwanPlus News. If you want to see more of our reports, visit our website, TaiwanPlus.com, or follow us on social media. We're leaving you with more images of Typhoon Krathon's effects along Taiwan's coast from throughout the day. I'm Eric Gao. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.